Hello and welcome to The Download from Wise Woman and Wordsmith, where insight meets inspiration. A space for creatives, dreamers and visionaries ready to spark new ideas, ignite purpose and reimagine possibilities. Here we share downloads of wisdom, stories and strategies to help you thrive in your creative journey. I'm your host, Jill Marshall. Tune in, connect and let the magic unfold. Welcome to Wise Woman and Wordsmith, the podcast where we explore wisdom, words, and the power of creativity to shape our world. I'm Jill Marshall, and today we're diving into an important and often uncomfortable topic, the historical and ongoing silencing of women. Now, let's face it, I'm from the birthplace of the Pankhursts, leaders of the suffragette movement in the UK. I live in the country, New Zealand, that first gave women the vote in 1893. I've known, worked with and supported amazing, inspiring women and girls speaking out and acting against inequality all over the world. This influences my books and my downloads, and yes, I'm going there in this episode of The Download. From the witch trials of the past, to suffragettes fighting for the right to vote, to present-day struggles in places like Afghanistan, we'll explore what this suppression means and why it's so crucial to challenge it. We'll also touch on the essential work of International Women's Day on March the 8th and other such events in advocating for gender equality. It's such a massive subject, and I can only touch on it and bring my own perspective and examples of subtle and some not so subtle silencing. So I do know it's a very small start, a tiny action, if you will. But many tiny waves make an ocean, and hopefully, together we can turn the tide. Women have been silenced in many ways throughout history, accused of witchcraft for being independent, denied the vote for being deemed irrational, excluded from leadership for being too emotional. But silencing isn't always as obvious as laws or executions. It happens in subtle and insidious ways every day, from small humiliations to overt threats. It happens in casual interactions, in workplaces, and at the highest levels of decision-making. I first experienced it myself, that I'm aware of, when I was about 17. Along with many other sixth formers, I was on the way home in the middle of the day following an examination. I was first in the queue, I leapt on the bus and I waved my bus pass at the driver and started to breeze past, but then he told me in no uncertain terms to either pay or to get off. He said I could only use the bus pass for one return journey per day, and this was lunchtime, so obviously I'd be coming back that afternoon. No, I said, I've just had an exam, as have all these other people, and I pointed to the stream of teenagers behind me, so we're all done for the day. Pay or get off, he said, eloquently. No, I said. It wasn't even that I didn't have the money, it was a matter of principle. And what if I hadn't had the money? The point of the bus pass was that students could get to their place of education for free. Anyway, there was a long standoff where I refused to move, and I made my poor friend going at the bus inspector, while a long line of agitated students waited behind me, and the driver stared daggers at me, muttering. The inspector then appeared, we each told him our position, and he confirmed that I was right. And then the inspector stood there while we all got on the bus with our bus passes as the driver scowled furiously through the front windscreen. A small victory on the side of what's right, I thought, even though I'm not sure some of my fellow students appreciated the wait. Anyway, I took my seat and did the usual chatting and dissecting of the exam, and then soon my bus stop appeared. I got off on my own for some reason and not with my usual gaggle of friends. And as I approached the front of the bus to get off, the nasty, middle-aged male bus driver growled, loud enough for many to hear, "Stupid bitch." I was so shocked, I almost missed my stop, and I got off the bus quite shaken, also wondering how the fact that I'd figured out a legal loophole that he'd missed made me stupid, or, quite honestly, a bitch. Now, I know it's not exactly a Rosa Parks moment, or even a Greta Thunberg one, but it was probably one of my first experiences of speaking out on behalf of what's right, and then getting abused or vilified for it. It certainly wasn't the last. So let's look back at ritual and systemic silences, to use some popular language, like the witch hunts. Between the 15th and the 18th centuries, and some would argue that it didn't stop until the 20th century, an estimated 50,000 to 80,000 people were executed for witchcraft across Europe and North America, around 80% of whom were women. Now, often these were just healers, midwives, or simply outspoken individuals who challenged authority, and for that were deemed dangerous. And the pattern didn't end with the witch trials. Women who speak up, whether for education, voting rights, or workplace equality, have often faced brutal resistance, usually from men, the system, the patriarchy, the establishment. The suffragettes in the early 20th century were arrested, force-fed in prison, ridiculed in the press, all because they demanded a voice in their own societies. Thanks to their efforts, women gained the right to vote in many countries, but even today, over 100 million women worldwide still live in nations where their political rights are severely restricted. And that fight continues. Just look at Afghanistan today. Since the Taliban's return to power, over 1.1 million girls have been banned from school. Women are no longer allowed to work in most professions or visit public parks or even travel without a male guardian. In Iran, women risk their lives to remove their hijabs as an act of defiance against oppressive laws. Globally, gender-based violence, censorship, and systemic barriers keep women in the shadows. And what's really worrying is that even in places where progress seemed certain and assured, we're seeing regression. I'm sure you don't need me to say this, but in the United States, women's reproductive rights are under renewed attack, with access to abortion services being restricted in several states, and more besides. In the UK and Europe, gender-based violence remains a major issue. Studies in fact show that 1 in 3 women worldwide experiences physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. And in the media, women's voices are still underrepresented. Only about 24% of news stories feature women as central figures. Which brings us, of course, to a crucial question. Why does this happen? A big part of it is an imbalance between masculine and feminine energies. In many societies, masculine energy, assertive, logical, hierarchical, according to the likes of Mark Zuckerberg, who just demanded more in Facebook and other organisations, has been dominant. Feminine energy, intuitive, nurturing, collaborative, has been devalued and seen as fluffy, unimportant, meaningless. Now, when these energies are out of balance, we get societies that favour control over connection, power over partnership. And when women are silenced, we all suffer. Innovation slows, compassion is diminished, future generations are shaped by a one-sided narrative. Balancing these energies isn't about men versus women, it's about creating a world where both are valued, whoever they're embodied by. So, what can we do? First, we listen to the women speaking out now, whether they're activists, journalists, or artists. We amplify their voices, support their causes, and challenge the systems that keep them quiet. And we examine our own spaces. Are we making room for diverse voices? Are we lifting others up? Perhaps we're not even recognising the subtle belittling and diminishing in which silencing can begin. A colleague of mine remembers being embarrassed and humiliated when she was shut down in a meeting because the guy running it said he couldn't understand her accent. I recall something similar when I was working, pretty successfully I might add, in HR in a large organisation. I was in a meeting with 2 senior divisional executives where we'd gone through a large amount of detail of our latest employee relations campaign. At the end, the boss asked what we should do next, and I gave him my opinion. Why, he asked, and then I made a fatal female mistake. Because it feels right, I said. And honestly, the 2 of them looked straight at each other and burst out laughing. Well, if it feels right, he repeated, and they both guffawed some more and slapped each other on the back. Now, I've learned since then, if instead I said, well, based on all the stats and the details we've just discussed for an hour, and the fact that I've managed this entire campaign for the last 6 months to great effect, and I know where the wrinkles are, then my gut says we should opt for this approach. In fact, if I'd spoken like one of them, a guy, then they'd have taken me seriously. Well, maybe, one never knows. As it turns out, they didn't do what I suggested, and yet what I felt was right, so they could have saved a lot of people a lot of reworking and heartache. But because I'd gone with my female languaging, I was literally laughed out of the room, and each time it happens, a little confidence, a little of your voice, crumbles away. And losing that voice can lead to many other losses. There was a time, some years ago, when I started a publishing company. It had begun very well, but then foundered somewhat, largely around the costs of printing several titles at once. The directors of the printing company had supported me from the start, and so when we had a very open discussion about what was happening, they came up with a suggestion. Why didn't they buy out my company of part of their diversifying portfolio as a $40 million business, and I could run it for a while and possibly work with them on upcoming trends like digital publishing, ebooks, and print on demand. Along with my business advisor, I went one sunny Friday to a board meeting with all the exec team attending, all but the newly appointed finance director, and we discussed all the options and agreed that the buyout would happen. Celebratory handshakes all round. Then, on the following Monday, literally 2 days later, my business advisor turned up in my office. It turned out he'd gone to school with the newly appointed finance director, and this little old boys' club had gathered around the water cooler at some point over the weekend, and the newly appointed finance director had decided that none of this was happening. The deal was off. No discussion. I've no idea to this day if he even discussed it with the exec team who'd met with me 3 days before. Instead, I was made to attend excruciating meetings where he sneered at the books I'd published as being not exactly aspirational and generally belittled and humiliated me. And the unbelievable piece now, to me, is that I didn't fight. I didn't say, your entire board agreed this just on Friday. I let 2 old buddies dismantle my business and part of theirs over a golf game. Nowadays, it makes me gag to think about it, especially when I consider that several of those non-aspirational books were nominated for awards within weeks of publication, and some of them won. Others went on to be bestsellers. It was an imbalanced attack of masculine energy, finance, numbers, plans, and spreadsheets, against the creative, innovative, and supportive feminine energy that was demonstrated not just by me, but by several male directors of their organisation. I ended up paying them back out of my own money until there was no more to give, and it took me a very, very long time to recover. So this is where events and activities like International Women's Day on March the 8th play a vital role. It's not just a celebration, it's a global call to action. Each year, this day highlights issues like gender equality, violence against women, and economic disparities. It reminds us that change is possible, but only if we commit to making it happen. For close to a decade, I covered International Women's Day from a communications perspective for forward-thinking organisations deeply committed to equality, diversity and inclusion, and championing those rather than dismantling them, as we've tragically seen happen in recent weeks. We shared incredible stories of courage and fortitude from women and girls across the world, daring all to make their voices be heard, and it was and is a humbling experience. It's perhaps even more upsetting then that one of my more recent examples of silencing happened in this kind of environment. By dint of my rolling comms, which meant I had to place the advert, I discovered that a new person was being recruited into a role exactly like mine, possibly my actual job. This was a department that I'd had some tense relations with over some months. Far from silenced at that point, I ranted in an email to my boss about this recruitment and continuing issues. And somewhere in the middle of this page-long rant, I mentioned that I was confused as to what was going on. Why did this keep happening? Was it possibly sexism? It was certainly 2 particular men who were at the pointy end of the very regular challenges to my position. My lovely male boss proposed to forward my email to the exec team of 4 people. I suggested leaving out the word sexist, but he felt it added something, so kept it in. And then we had a meeting, online. Curiously, the one female member of the exec team was not at the meeting. I don't know if she was ever invited. The 2 particular men sat beside each other in the same office in the same little rectangle on the screen, alternately glaring at me or talking to each other off mic whenever I was speaking. There was a scanty and unhelpful discussion about the role being recruited, which basically amounted to, we're doing it, so there. And then there was a long and pregnant pause in which I knew something more was expected, not of them, but of me. So, before the silence hurt even more, I mentioned the elephant in the room, and I apologised. I apologised for possibly mentioning in a private email to one person that I might possibly, with one word that I'd asked to be removed, called them sexist. Now the relief was palpable. I was thanked for my apology. The meeting was over, and it became very clear that the point of the meeting in their mind was for me to do exactly that, to apologise to these men who'd undermined my position in the past, and then set out to do more of the same. From that moment, anything I put forward was shot down By this department, I would be openly criticised in meetings in ways that I rarely saw in what was generally a hugely caring organisation, staffed by truly wonderful people doing many wonderful things worldwide, including some astonishing acts of rescue and remarkably strong female and male leadership in the face of adversity that flew almost entirely under the radar. The constant looking over my shoulder for this couple of poison apples began to take its toll. I spoke less and less in meetings. I stopped innovating and creating and just did what I was told. On one occasion, as I was about to present online, I felt my chin moving independently of the rest of my face. It wasn't how I felt, but it was as if I was about to cry. I delivered the whole presentation with my hands clamped over my face. After 30 years of life as a trainer, speaker, and a leader from multiple platforms, my confidence to speak aloud had been shattered to the point that my body was refusing to cooperate. It was only after I finally left that organisation, abruptly and with nothing to go to, after the final straw of my every decision being overturned, that it was confirmed I hadn't imagined this campaign of attrition, and also that similar silencing had happened to other women over the years. Once again, as with the bus driver, the HR campaign, the printers, I had been right. And yet I was the one to be silenced. Now, I know I'm far from perfect. I can be flaky on finances and ditzy on details. And like anyone, there'll have been points in my life where some feedback about my performance was justified. The problems come, though, when that slow attrition of silencing makes you doubt yourself so much that you believe all of it is justified, from the petty put-down to terrible persecution for daring to speak out, to speak for oneself. The silencing takes hold. Well, it's no wonder when I look back that I write about suffragettes in Gossip Girl and quietly strong spies in Jane Blonde and a whole dynasty of persecuted wise women and witch kind in the Matilda Peppercorn series. And it's no wonder that I wrote The Most Beautiful Man in the World about 3 women taking their lives back from a narcissistic male, a male actually suffering from narcissistic personality disorder. I was asked some years ago what I thought the major threat to the world was, whether it was climate change or AI, and I said at the time it is male narcissism, and I think world events are now proving that over and over again. So first, I've got my books. They are my voice, and the voice of other girls and women and divine masculines who embrace the balance. And now I have a podcast. Now I am literally far from silent. And I know that far worse has happened and is happening in every moment. Silencing women has been a tool of oppression for centuries, but the tide can turn when we recognise the value of balance, when we honour both wisdom and action, intuition and strategy, nurturing and leading. Let's continue the conversation. Until next time, stay wise, stay powerful, stay vocal. Thanks for tuning in to the Download podcast. Feel free to like, comment and share and all of that good stuff. And for more about my books, coaching and business services, please check out wisewomanandwordsmith.com.